Hello, thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this webinar. My name is Kendra and I'm a registered psychotherapist. I've been working with parents and children for over 12 years in primary healthcare and private practice. I'm a peaceful parent coach and trained in understanding the brain-body connection. I love sharing my knowledge with parents and guiding them to support their children in ways that many of us weren't parented as children ourselves. A lot of the content of this webinar has been taken from the book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew by Dr. Sharon Celine. This book is in line with Dr. Laura Markham's model of peaceful parenting, which is the model I practice when coaching parents. So, if you haven't already, I recommend that you also watch my two-part webinar, Peaceful Brain-Body Parenting. I had so much information to provide for this webinar that I broke it into two parts. The first part is approximately 30 minutes and focuses on what it's like to have an ADHD brain, Dr. Celine's 5 C's of ADHD parenting, which focuses on building compassion and strengthening your connection, executive functioning skills and how they relate to ADHD, and what it's like to have an ADHD brain and big feelings. The second part is approximately 40 minutes and provides specific plans for supporting the ADHD brain with challenges related to schoolwork, chores, friendships, and technology. Parenting any child is hard, but parenting a child with ADHD sometimes feels like peaks of progress are regularly followed by intense backslides. Daily life is often harder for kids with ADHD. They seem to struggle academically, socially, and psychologically. They forget things, they can't slow down, they find it hard to focus, and they space out regularly. They're disorganized, they feel overwhelmed, they can't control their emotions, and they miss the nuances of peer interaction. Although they like their creativity, their out-of-the-box thinking, and their energy, they're usually ashamed of all their shortcomings, want to avoid dealing with them, and often feel powerless to change. Similar to most kids, they just want to be normal. They certainly don't want to have a disorder, and no matter how many times you tell them that it's just a brain difference, they definitely think it's more than a focus problem. As a parent, it's difficult to feel competent and be effective in assisting them to overcome the daily challenges they face and embrace the brains that they have. How can you listen to what they're telling you about their experiences and offer empathy and guidance? Honestly, it's as difficult for them as it is for you. It's so important to remember that kids with ADHD are doing the best they can with their skills that are compromised by the inherent complexities of having ADHD. They often feel misunderstood and criticized for things that they can't help doing. They also want to be connected to others, loved, and accepted for who they are. They want to be skilled and successful. They want to feel like they belong, and they especially want to be heard. But often the kids feel the opposite: incompetent, insecure, worried, angry, and silenced. Sometimes they cling to parents' help and others push it away. But just like all kids, they desperately crave parent approval and support. They also want acceptance from teachers and peers. The goal of this webinar is to provide you with the tools to listen to your child's stories about having ADHD and respond empathetically, supportively, and calmly. You will begin to notice what your child is communicating to you with words and actions and learn how to work together towards solutions for everyday challenges. Your child will see you as an ally, and when this happens, they will be more open to your suggestions because they feel seen and heard. Dr. Celine utilizes the 5 C's of ADHD parenting to support you on this journey. Kids, especially those with ADHD, need more assistance. Practice the first C of self-control by managing your own feelings so you can act more effectively. Notice when you're becoming riled up and try to bring yourself back and regroup. Once you're feeling settled, then you can help your child to do the same. Kids with ADHD are doing the best they can while living with significant executive functioning challenges. When they forget a history project, they're struggling with working memory and organization, not being lazy. Use the second C, compassion, to meet kids where they are, not where you think they should be. Have compassion for yourself too. It's easier to accept your child and their challenges when you can also accept your own personal challenges. It often takes kids longer to develop life skills than adults expect. Kids with ADHD have their own ideas about what is and isn't working and what might help, but they constantly hear from adults and peers about their mistakes and what they should do differently. Others' ideas, however, don't often work for their brains. Use the third C, collaboration, and work with kids to come up with solutions rather than imposing rules on them. Use a we rather than you attitude. Ultimately, and in crisis, you get the final word, but you can expect more cooperation when you include their thoughts too. Despite protests, kids with ADHD thrive on routines and predictability. It's confusing when parents or educators don't stick with the agreed upon behavioral plan. Do you mean what you say? Do you give in? The 4C reminds us to stay consistent without aiming for perfection. Aim for clear messages and similar consequences for the same behavior as often as possible. Avoid consequences that you can't enforce, remember, or support. Many parents expect immediate changes in a youngster's behavior when they give feedback or start a behavioral plan. Often boredom quickly sets in and kids with ADHD lose motivation and momentum. Acknowledge progress by using the 5th C, celebration. A high five and thanks conveys important messages. You notice their efforts and you're pleased with them. Studies have found that a 3-to-1 ratio of positive to negative comments can significantly promote behavioral changes and can-do attitudes. Just as no two kids with ADHD are identical, neither are their brains. These differences contribute to what makes each person's experience their own. I really like Jessica McCabe's YouTube channel, How to ADHD, and the video I'm going to show you next discusses what it's like for kids to have an ADHD brain.
Hello, brains, and probably people sent here by brains. I get it. It can be hard to understand ADHD and even harder to explain it to others. Most ADHD behaviors are things everyone struggles with once in a while. Losing your keys, spacing out during a conversation, forgetting to turn in an assignment. Sound familiar? Yeah, and when someone with ADHD does these things a lot, it's easy to assume that it means the same thing as if someone without ADHD does them. Once in a while is understandable, but if it happens a lot, they must not care, or not be trying hard enough, or not be very good at stuff. But before we judge their behavior or write them off as a bad whatever, it's important to remember behavior is affected by the brain, and ADHD brains develop and function much differently from average or neurotypical brains. Those differences can be valuable, which is why, as someone with ADHD, I wouldn't trade my brain for the world. But without the right support, they can also be incredibly impairing. The struggle is real. It's also invisible, which can make it very hard to see. So to help you understand what it's like inside the brain of your ADHD person, we reached out to our community of ADHD brains as well as the community at understood.org to ask how they explain it. For example, fun fact, despite the name, we don't actually have a deficit of attention. When we forget to change the laundry or have trouble focusing in class, it's because our brains have trouble regulating or effectively shifting our attention. So sometimes our brains jump from one thing to the next, and other times our brains actually zero in or hyper-focus on one thing, and it can be hard for us to pull ourselves away. As Eric Peterson puts it, neurotypical brains have a 1 through 10 dial they use to regulate their attention. With ADHD brains, our dials have 2 options, random and 15. And this applies to all aspects of our lives. The ability to regulate attention is part of something called the executive function system. It's kind of like our brain's self-management system, what allows us to plan, prioritize, and sustain effort toward a goal, say, making dinner, without getting sidetracked. It's what allows us to inhibit or not act on our impulses and ignore distractions so we can stay on task and switch when it's time to switch. In the ADHD brain, executive functions develop much more slowly than in neurotypical brains. And we have a deficit in the brain chemicals that help them function. So we usually know what to do and have the best intentions, but our executive function system isn't always developed or functioning well enough to effectively help us do it. And it's just as frustrating for us as it is for anyone else. Haley Melville explains it like this. Your brain is like a secretary, and you're the CEO in a meeting, doing a task. In a neurotypical brain, their secretary greets guests, potential distractions, lets them know that the CEO is in a meeting, and either encourages them to make an appointment or shows them the door. My secretary either lets everyone into the meeting or lets no one in, even if it's something important. Another executive function is working memory. That's our ability to temporarily hold information in our head so we can work with it. Like, look at a recipe and then remember the steps while we cook. It's our brain's version of RAM. Everyone has a limited capacity of working memory, but it's often more limited in those with ADHD, which is one reason we might blurt out an answer before we forget it, or ask you to repeat what you just said. Timothy Warnke says, "It's like my brain is a whiteboard, and I have to write down everything that's happening right away. But I write kind of big, so pretty soon I have to erase a bunch of stuff to make more room." By the way, that's also why we tend to have trouble following multi-step directions. It's also why Post-it notes are helpful. Another fun fact about ADHD, not everyone with ADHD is hyperactive, at least not on the outside. ADHD has 3 different presentations, and they can change over time. So even if someone doesn't look like they have ADHD, they still might. Even if they're not bouncing around the room, their brain might be. It's often referred to as internal restlessness, and it's exhausting. Diana DeVader Murray explains her mind like being on a hamster wheel you can't ever get off of. Deborah Cradaville says it's like a pinball machine with the ball constantly hitting and bouncing between all the bumpers. All this energy can be great when we can direct it well. It often shows up as creativity, generosity, curiosity. We tend to think outside the box, and we're 3 times more likely to start our own business. But for us to take advantage of our brain's strengths, it's important that we learn to manage our ADHD, which often means using a combination of medication and other strategies. ADHD expert Dr. Ned Hallowell explains it like this. Having ADHD is like having a race car engine for a brain. It's very powerful, and it can propel you to win races. There's just one problem. You have bicycle brakes. But with the help of a brake specialist, you learn to strengthen your brakes and control that powerful engine. Then your race car stops spinning out on turns and starts winning races. Because we do tend to crash a lot while we're building up those brakes, those of us with ADHD tend to get corrected or teased more often than our peers. And unfortunately, another aspect of ADHD can make that extra painful for us. Our brains don't just have trouble regulating our attention, they have trouble regulating our emotions too. Jennifer Peterson explains, when it comes to emotional dysregulation, it's like I have a really bad sunburn. Even a playful slap on the back hurts so bad. If you didn't know some of these things about ADHD, don't worry, I didn't either until a couple of years ago, and I actually have it. I thought I was just too sensitive, or a space cadet, or weird, because that's what I was always told, and I'm not alone. That's why ADHD Brains made this video, and why we hope you'll share it. When our ADHD symptoms are seen as personality defects, it can be hurtful, and worse, we believe it. It takes a huge toll on our self-esteem and can lead to other conditions like anxiety and depression. And honestly, it's really confusing. As Comiendo Biscocho puts it, it's like being the smartest, stupidest, most motivated, and laziest person in the room, all at the same time. But if we and others understand what our challenges are, we can accept them, find strategies to help us work through them, and more importantly, stop beating ourselves up about them so we can focus on more important things, like what we're good at. And we can stop writing off ourselves or others for being different and start appreciating what that difference can bring to the world. And head over to understood.org to experience what it's like to have ADHD and other conditions with their tool through your child's eyes. Remember though, ADHD looks different for everybody, and those with ADHD often have other conditions as well. So the best way to understand somebody's brain is to ask them about it.
Coping with an ADHD diagnosis is easier when those impacted can come to a place of acceptance using the first and second C's, self-control and compassion. Self-control helps manage the range of feelings and thoughts everybody in the family will have to this new diagnosis. As a parent, you need to figure out what having an ADHD child means to you. You cannot offer genuine or effective support if you haven't explored your own feelings. Otherwise, those feelings will ultimately leak out into your interactions with your child, often in unhelpful ways. It's perfectly normal for your feelings to run the gamut from uncertainty, relief, anxiety, anger, worry, or sadness. Children can also feel a mixed bag of emotions from huge relief to embarrassment and shame. Visits to doctors and specialists do not convey a message that ADHD is normal because we often go to the doctor when we're sick and something isn't right, not when things are going well. For some kids, ADHD is a negative label, whereas others feel it's liberating. For all kids, it means adjusting to how they see themselves. Instead of using a medical term that can feel foreign, scary, or diseased to some kids, you can reduce the stress of ADHD by focusing on what is personal about it for them. Acceptance also requires compassion. Compassion is crucial in understanding what ADHD looks like for your child, how it shows up in daily life, and how it affects the entire family. Compassion requires empathy to foster understanding. How can you appreciate what the experience of having ADHD means for your child so you can support and assist them in ways that help? When you remember what you love about your child, it's easier to see challenging behavior as signs of their frustrations instead of personal weaknesses. Executive functions, or EFs, are a set of complex brain functions needed to achieve and accomplish goals that exist all over the brain, but predominantly in the prefrontal cortex, or the smart part of the brain. EFs refer to how the prefrontal cortex manages the other systems of the brain. Similar to how a director coordinates all aspects of a film, the sound, the lighting, the sets, the costumes, the actors, humans need EFs to create, plan, and accomplish tasks, to solve problems, and to handle feelings and behaviors. EF skills unfold developmentally as people use them, but not in a linear fashion. In kids with ADHD, this happens more slowly than it does for their peers because of their differences in brain maturity. I think it's also important to remind ourselves that even as adults, we struggle with EFs. EF skills can be divided into two categories, hot and cool skills. Hot skills are the ones we use consciously in our daily lives, and they tend to be related to behavior. A human who has the EF skill of self-regulation would be able to stop and think before doing or saying something, and exert control over their body and speech in order to act appropriately in family and school situations. A human who has the EF skill of managing feelings would be able to regulate emotions, especially anger and anxiety, have patience and tolerate frustration, and would not get upset about the little things. A human who has the EF skill of organization would be able to keep their bedroom, locker, notebook clean and neat, and find things when needed or rarely lose items. A human who has the EF skill of time management would be able to do things on time and meet deadlines, correctly estimate how long something will take, and wouldn't procrastinate a lot. A human who has the EF skill of planning and prioritizing would be able to figure out a method for getting things done, know where to start on big projects without finding them overwhelming, and easily decide what is most important when there are multiple things to do. A human who has the EF skill of initiating would be able to get started on chores or homework and finish them efficiently, often without direction or excessive reminding, and show motivation to begin a task. This slide depicts the cool executive function skills. Cool skills are more abstract and unconscious, and they relate mostly to thinking. A human who has the EF skill of alertness would be able to stay awake and engaged when doing a boring activity. A human who has the EF skill of processing information would be able to understand and apply new information efficiently. A human who has the EF skill of perseverance would be able to show consistent efforts when trying to do something routine, new, or challenging. A human who has the EF skill of working memory would be able to hold on to one piece of information while doing different things, recall things from the past and apply them to the present or future, and remember and follow steps in a series of directions. A human who has the EF skill of self-awareness would possess awareness of how personal behavior impacts other people, respond positively to feedback, show appropriate judgment, and want to learn from their mistakes. A human who has the EF skill of shift flexibility would be able to shift focus onto something else, like stopping their computer game and sitting down for dinner. They would be able to go with the flow and adjust to changing situations. A human who has the EF skill of goal-oriented persistence would be able to set a goal, stay focused on it, and return to the task right after an interruption. They would stick with the task over time regardless of its length or pace of personal processing speed. A human who has the EF skill of sustained attention would be able to manage attention and resist distractions when faced with a task. It can be very frustrating when your 10-year-old son can make their bed every morning and come downstairs for breakfast without being told, while your 12-year-old daughter leaves her bed in a heap, has trouble getting dressed in a timely manner, and needs 5 reminders to come for a bagel. Take a deep breath and remember that different brains mature and learn EF skills at different paces. Aiding your daughter in mastering the sequence of the morning routine ultimately means you go from telling her what to do to her telling herself what to do. This is what we refer to as scaffolding the learning. Scaffolding takes time because internalizing self-talk in youngsters with ADHD takes longer. You may tell your daughter to grab her backpack and hockey equipment and get in the car, and then hear her talking to herself about what she's going to do. This is a good thing. She's building her EF skills for internal speech that will guide her actions. When she arrives at the car with her backpack and hockey stick in tow, she is showing you how that self-talk led her there. What occurs naturally to some kids without thinking can be harder for your child with ADHD. It's important to remember that EF skill development happens slower for kids with ADHD than it does for their peers because of differences in brain maturity. This is why they usually have EF challenges such as procrastination, disorganization, forgetfulness, impulsivity, and inattentiveness. However, most kids with ADHD also have EF strengths as well as challenges, so learning to rely more on the strengths while strategizing ways to bolster the slower developing skills is important. The 5 C's of ADHD parenting targets EF challenges and offers you a clear and effective way to improve them. Kids with ADHD tend to have a strong sense of justice, sensitivity, and of course, energy. When they feel wronged, disempowered, or unheard, they can become quite mad. When their expectation about what's supposed to happen and what actually occurs differ, they often struggle to adjust and can explode. They also lack the skills to express their feelings appropriately and explain what's going on for them. Kids without ADHD struggle with this too. It's just that for ADHD kids, the emotional flooding comes on sooner. Generally, ADHD kids see anger as part of themselves that they don't like because they can't control it and they regret their actions. Anxiety reflects an excessive, intense fear about something in the future. Anxious kids want certainty and comfort. They like to know what's going on, what will happen, and how to feel safe. It's common for all kids to experience anxiety. In these moments, it's typical for them to retreat from the source of their concerns and the discomfort they feel and rely on parents or friends for reassurance until they feel more confident. Usually these concerns go away when a child has mastered the tasks associated with the new situation. For kids with ADHD, whose EF challenges may delay mastery and confidence, anxiety can stick around longer. In addition, the constant stream of corrections directed toward them can increase their insecurity about whether or not they can manage what comes along. I encourage you to watch my webinar, Break the Cycle of Anxious Worrying, for more information and strategies. Whether the topic is anger or anxiety, those with ADHD describe being overwhelmed by the intensity of feelings. The intensities of positive and negative feelings flood the developing capacities of the ADHD brain, and they're unable to gauge the consequences of behaviors. Their overtaxed EF skills often cannot cope with effectively managing and responding to this rush of emotions. When kids are flooded by feelings, they struggle to access those parts of themselves that know what the good choices are. The big emotions push aside any sensible information about how to deal appropriately with what's happening. ADHD kids' EF skills are simply not developed enough to do this as adeptly as a peer or an adult would. This all comes down to the process of what we call flipping your lid, developed by Dr. Dan Siegel. I'm going to show you a quick clip that explains this concept.
We're going to use our hand to make a model of our brain. Hold up your hand like this. We start with our wrist and palm. This represents our brainstem. Now, fold your thumb into your palm, just like this. Can you do that? Your thumb represents the amygdala. These parts of our brain, our brainstem and our amygdala, are some of the earliest parts of our brain to develop and sometimes get the nickname of lizard brain. Now that we have our amygdala, wrap your fingers over your thumb to make a fist, just like this. These fingers represent our upper brain. Back here is our cerebellum. That keeps us balanced. Up top, we have our cerebrum. That helps us think and speak. And right up front, we have the prefrontal cortex, which helps us make smart decisions. This is our hand-brain model, and it's a great symbol of our brain. It's not exactly what the brain looks like, but it can help us communicate things about our brain and how we're feeling. Like, look at this. See how our cerebrum and prefrontal cortex wrap snugly over our amygdala, keeping it nice and secure? When our prefrontal cortex is in control, we feel happy, calm, and focused. We are ready to do our best learning. But we don't always feel that way, do we? Sometimes we feel upset, or angry, or frustrated, or too excited. Sometimes we even feel so silly it feels like we're losing control of our bodies. And that's okay. We all have times where our emotions take over and we have a hard time focusing and making smart decisions. When we feel this way, it's because our amygdala is in control. We can represent this by opening our palm to show our amygdala. It's kind of like saying, I flipped my lid and now my amygdala is in control. Right now, we can't even see the prefrontal cortex. Our hand-brain model gives us a great way to communicate which part of our brain is in control. And that's really important because when our amygdala takes control, we have a very hard time focusing. The amygdala is great at emotions, but not so great at making decisions.
Managing feelings relies on working memory. Working memory has 3 principal parts. It holds one piece of information in your mind while you do different things. It calls up something from the past and applies it to the present or future, and it recalls and follows steps in a series of given directions. Research has linked working memory to controlling and expressing emotions. Working memory also helps us to see the big picture. Working memory is one of the EF skills frequently impacted by ADHD. Knowing this, you can begin to understand why your child with ADHD flips their lid faster and becomes flooded with big feelings more easily than peers who do not have ADHD. Arguments as you rush to get to school and work in the morning, tripping over a forgotten shoe left in the middle of the hall, or finding a container of spoiled milk left on the kitchen counter are all incidences that can drive you crazy as a parent. It seems like no matter how many times you remind the child, the same problems keep coming back. We have to remind ourselves that it takes practice, experience, and time to build the necessary EF skills, and your ADHD child requires a lot of trial and error learning. Even if you don't have ADHD, you're likely to have some EF strengths and challenges as part of your genetic material and behavior patterns that you have passed on to your child. I encourage you to take a look back at the EF skills and see how often you put them into place in real life. There might be areas that you are similar and different from your ADHD child. You can discuss what each person does to address challenges of their weaker EF skills and explore whether one person's strategies might appeal to somebody else. Your child with ADHD may prefer a messier room than you're comfortable with. A tiring battle ensues as you struggle with them to get their room into an order that you consider clean enough. Kids with ADHD have their own ideas about order, cleanliness, and planning that makes perfect sense to them. They want their ideas, however simplistic or silly they seem, to be heard, considered, and hopefully integrated into whatever organizational routine you can establish. Their input increases their participation. Collaboration relies on your partnership with your child and identifying what is going well and what needs improvement. In collaboration, you and your child can brainstorm ways of living better with ADHD, so together you can find and develop new alternatives to challenging behaviors. You set the standards, negotiate what's achievable, incorporate some of their ideas, and teach them the skills to make it all happen. It's neither my way or the highway, nor their way or no way, but rather our agreed upon way. When kids are younger, you can work with them on the task at hand so they can learn the necessary steps and you can offer your assistance. As they mature and the director of their prefrontal cortex develops, you can slowly step away. Believe it or not, your influence will plant seeds that they will use later on. Have conversations about all aspects of their lives, home, school, sports, activities, jobs, friends, and brainstorm what they would like to be different and why. Help to reframe their failures as challenges, and point out all the people who are there to support them. Together, you can co-create plans that foster desired changes. Kids are more likely to buy into plans if they help create them. Reassure them that you are on their side for the long haul. One of the biggest obstacles in the collaboration phase is parents wanting to shift too many things too fast. Most kids, especially those with ADHD, really can't alter more than one thing about them at a time. Truthfully, most adults can't either. ADHD youth frequently get overwhelmed by the number of things they're told that they need to fix about themselves. Feeling ashamed, embarrassed, frustrated, or mad causes kids to shut down and reject help. When this happens, negotiations fail and collaboration doesn't occur. Most kids want to be independent and see asking for help as a sign of weakness. Giving them a long list of what to do differently implies that there's something wrong with them. The collaboration phase works best when parents and kids focus on one thing that's going really well while simultaneously focusing on another thing that needs improvement. The final phase of accepting the ADHD brain involves you taking your collaborative plan, putting it into action, and making it stick. Implementing different approaches to old problems requires the fourth and fifth C, consistency and celebration, which depend on efforting. Efforting happens when you and your ADHD child practice and integrate these new solutions. It requires a lot of persistence and resiliency because there will definitely be unforeseen setbacks. When you hit a setback, you make adjustments. This is where the philosophy of practice makes perfect has been changed to practice makes progress at my house. Persevering with your child through these roadblocks teaches them about grit and also how much you care. Many kids with ADHD have difficulty envisioning how things can be different given the frequent negative feedback they receive. Like all kids, they struggle to accurately perceive the future. When things get hard, they quickly become upset, angry, or defeated. But when they see you hold on to the shared goals in times of struggle and you regroup instead of quit, when you continue to exert yourself despite being tired and discouraged, they learn that they can do it too. Obviously, you can't do this all the time, but the goal is to do it more often than not. Your modeling is essential for effective consistency and persistent offering. I understand that as parents, sometimes these defeats feel like failures, but really they're critical pieces of information. When a co-created plan intensifies problem behaviors, it means the plan needs to be changed. These adjustments mean that you have to examine the cycle of what's happening step by step and notice what's working and what's not. New solutions to any kind of problem must include celebration. When you don't notice that things are improving, it's difficult to keep up the momentum for these changes to settle in. Everybody likes positive feedback. Kids with ADHD who already receive so many negative messages especially benefit from enthusiasm when they attempt to do things differently. I'm not talking about false praise or fake excitement. When your child takes their dishes to the counter, I'm not suggesting that you give them a trophy, but rather a casual, "nice job," will suffice. Your opinions and support really matter. When you notice their effort, they thrive. Not only are you their ally, but also their witness. Regardless of how your child may act, defiant, grateful, disagreeable, appreciative, rejecting, or cooperative, youth repeatedly emphasize how important their parents have been to them in accepting their ADHD and learning to live successfully with it. When you pay attention to your ADHD child's efforts to do things differently, you make them feel seen, heard, and valued. Instead of mostly pointing out what they should do differently, you do the opposite. Let them know what they've done well. It's not easy to do, especially because it's so easy to focus on the flaws and inadequacies in our achievement-oriented society. Nonetheless, all parents, regardless of whether there's a diagnosis, have to do this in order to raise kids who feel good about themselves. Children and teens internalize our voices, whether they're positive or negative. I hope the first part of this webinar series has provided you with some new insight about what it's like to have an ADHD brain, as well as some of the considerations and strategies you can make to support your child. Thanks for watching. See you in part 2.